personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a very special guest on the show, Nandita Rao Narla. She is the head of technical privacy and governance at DoorDash. Welcome.
Thanks, Debbie, for having me. I've been following your podcast and I've really enjoyed it, so I feel honored to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. I love your content. The comments that you make on LinkedIn, they're always very sharp and smart. It's evident that you know a lot about data and technology, and I'm a technologist, so that definitely appeals to me. I was excited that you said yes, that you'd be on the podcast. So this would be a fun session to talk about. Let's talk a bit about your journey, your career journey. Now, I think you're probably the only person I can think of that's been on the show that's had this particular trajectory. I would love to hear your background, definitely your path into privacy, but also talking about your transition from security engineering to privacy engineering, because I know a ton of people who are in cyber and security and they're interested in privacy and they don't know how to make that transition. So hearing your story, I think, will help them understand how maybe they can think about that as well.
Yeah, happy to share my journey. For undergrad, I studied computer science, and right after completing computer science program, I enrolled in a master's program in cybersecurity. At that point, I was very focused on cybersecurity, and this was at Carnegie Mellon during my master's that I found out that there was such a thing as privacy, and that was very appealing to me. So right at that time, even looking for internships, I was very interested in doing something in the privacy space, but this was 12 years ago before GDPR. So there were no privacy engineering jobs. There were no jobs for technical privacy people. There were jobs for lawyers, but that career sort of trajectory didn't exist. I remember going to the career fair, and there were exactly 4 jobs that even had the word privacy in it from the hundreds that were available to new grads. So I applied to all 4. One was in healthcare, one was in financial the sector, and then 2 were in consulting. So I joined EY in their cybersecurity consulting practice just because it was an opportunity to do something very broad and pivot to doing more privacy technical things. At my time at EY, which was the consulting and the cybersecurity practice, there were a lot of projects that aligned to privacy, focused on either data governance or doing code reviews, building secure enclaves to keep data in one place or build controls around data. There were projects that I worked on, for example, for export control projects where there's certain IP that can't leave the US. It's very similar to how we think about data localization and residency. So as I was doing these cybersecurity projects, it was easy to apply those same learnings into privacy realms, methodologies on security by design, doing security technical evaluations, architecture reviews, translating those into privacy engineering seemed almost logical to me. And this was at the same time where GDPR happened. So a lot of companies wanted to be more proactive in the technical control space. They wanted consulting companies to come and analyze their programs, give them roadmaps, and do evaluations and find gaps. So that was the time when I got really focused on privacy, and I wanted to do more, build a career in privacy. And after that, I was a founding team of a privacy tech startup, taking all the learnings from consulting for 10 years, building the different products for large companies, Fortune 500 companies. We wanted to build the tool ourselves, a data classification tool, a data risk platform, raised funding. It was great. And then at that point, the company decided to pivot to more security, data protection. And I then joined DoorDash as my first full-time, only doing technical privacy. And that's been great.
That's a great story. I think people who, like you, were in a data space, the work that you were doing on privacy before GDPR, it was just no one really thought about. They're like, oh, that's just part of the job, right? It's like the bottom bullet point on a long list of stuff. You're like, yeah, we do export controls or whatever. But that's how I really got into it. I also had a personal interest in privacy, but I started to see how it started to merge in with what I'm doing technically. So that was definitely my path. You're probably one of the best people to ask this question, which is, what is your vision about the difference between cybersecurity and privacy?
I think we have to think about it as an overlapping Venn diagram. There are things that are common to both. You need to protect personal information, and those protections include cybersecurity controls. So that's the common space. Where it differs is, I think cybersecurity is more focused on protecting the risk to the company. You're protecting the organization, and you're either from a reputational damage or just breaches that affect financial bottom lines of companies. Versus in the privacy space, you're more focused on risk to individuals, to end users. And sometimes it's the organization or the company that's causing the risk, or a financial harm, or a privacy harm to the individual. So that's just a different mindset, that when you're coming from cybersecurity to privacy, you need to think more about the people who are impacted, not the company's assets.
That's one of the best ways I've heard anyone describe the difference. A lot of times people think of it as the same. It's like, no, it's not the same. I think it does overlap. I always say that privacy and cybersecurity have a semiotic relationship. So they definitely do have some overlap, and there's interplay there. And there has to be, I think, companies that have people like you who understand both sides of that. I think it makes you just a great asset for sure. Let's talk a little bit about, I know you were saying that when you started your journey and being interested in privacy, there weren't a lot of jobs, there wasn't a lot of attention, and now there's tons of jobs and lots of attention, right? And I think that's definitely great. But what is the gap you think that happens within organizations? And I can tell you my thoughts. So I think a lot of times companies think about privacy as a legal issue that has data ramifications, as opposed to a data issue that could possibly have legal ramifications. So I feel like your problem starts at the data level before it ever gets to the legal level. What are your thoughts?
100% agree. And that's why anybody who is in data governance can be a good candidate for transitioning into privacy, because you need to know what you have, where you have it, where it's flowing, to be able to build any sort of controls around that. The biggest challenge when it comes to privacy is just having access to the data, or using the data is not enough to make decisions. You need to understand why the data is being used, how it will be used. And sometimes only engineers know that. It's like everybody in the engineering team has access to data. Some may use it for identity verification processes, which is valid and required. But then they use the same data for targeting ads or doing something else without consent. And a lot of times, they don't know the difference between those use cases, and there aren't enough guardrails. And when legal teams weigh in, write policies, and they write these guardrail documents, but they lack understanding of how it will be technically enforced. So there is a disconnect between the two. I feel that's why we need these hybrid technical privacy program managers or product people who sort of know both enough to be able to be the gel between the two and bridge the gap.
I agree with that. That's a role that I play because I'm very familiar with both spaces. So it's fun.
I feel like lawmakers keep writing convoluted laws which are difficult to interpret. There will be lots of jobs in the privacy space.
I never thought about that. Job creation by creating, right. some of these laws, it's like, okay, I passed this law. I was like, well, how are you going to do that from a technical point of view? I'm like, do you even understand how data work? It's true.
When I read the law and I read regulation just to be able to better understand what to build, it's not easy. It's such a high level that for any engineering build, you need very specific requirements. You need to have exactly what needs to be built, what should be the expected result. How would you test if that what has been built is meeting the standards? So this is where, we need some sort of standards or like reference architectures or some best practice guidance that can be more lift and shift for smaller companies to implement.
I agree with that. Your thoughts about data deletion? And so this is a topic I love to talk to privacy engineer folks about. Now, regular folks think of deletion as like, oh, I press a button and everything is gone. But we know within enterprises, deletion takes many different avenues, and especially depending on how the data is used in different places. You can't press a button and, for example, delete stuff in 12 different places. The systems aren't really made that way. Describe what deletion entails, the complication of it, how complicated it is to actually achieve deletion from a technical point of view.
Show me all the curveballs and all the controversial questions. A lot of times when we say that we want something to be deleted, it is not a hard delete. And that's not how it is enforced technically. Hard deletion, irreversible, and may have downstream impacts from like an integrity perspective. Like you need to have a log of certain things that happened. And maybe that's required for certain other bug fixes or some other legitimate uses. So it's uncommon to do hard deletes, but there are cases when that's done. What we mean by deletion in most cases is either it is de-identified to some degree. So I think that's like a whole spectrum of what is de-identified, and then goes into this whole legal definition of what is anonymized data, what is de-identified data, what is pseudonymized data. So I think sometimes there's like masking policies which are reversible. So unfortunately, some companies try to use that as a delete, replacement, and then you can do sometimes some hashing functions which are irreversible. So you've rendered the data sort of unusable. It's gibberish, though. So you can essentially call it delete. But we want to make sure that when you say something is deleted, there should be no way of re-identifying that individual. And that's where the focus should be, to like do some sort of like threat modeling exercise to like what are all possible ways that this can break and address all those gaps.
Thank you for that. I think people just misunderstand that. So I'm happy that you were able to tell me that. Let's talk about AI. So since everyone is so crazy now about AI, everyone wants to do AI now, right? AI is not a new thing, but it's definitely gotten a lot more media attention because of ChatGPT and these other LLMs that are now in the news. Tell me your thought about how maybe even generative AI makes privacy more complicated in your view.
I think like there's a lot that has been talked about generative AI and its privacy consequences. For me, I think the biggest challenge that I see is like doing technical evaluations for use cases, especially when the data is unreliable. That's been a big piece of where you don't have full visibility into a system. It's difficult to assess risk. It's difficult to make judgments about what use cases can be approved or eligible or not. We're going to be talking about this at IPP. So I'm happy to like share some the slides from that conversation. There's going to be a very interesting panel that talks about ML and AI and privacy risks much better than I can. So I'm going to make sure I share those slides with you, Debbie.
That'd be really helpful, really cool. Let's talk about end of life data. So I think the companies are very, very good at collecting data, truly, right? But the end of life, that's where things get a little murky. Part of that is because of privacy. So what privacy regulations have done is bring in more requirements around data retention, how long you keep things. Before GDPR, before some of these other privacy laws went into effect, there really wasn't anything that said that there needs to be an end date or end time, or that you could not keep stuff forever, right? I think that's one of the big things. Companies who are accustomed to keeping everything and not really, okay, we need it for this purpose, we'll keep it, put it in the back room, it doesn't matter. Now that data that they don't want to delete now is like a risk. So what are your thoughts there?
I'm sure most companies, and I speak for all of the tech companies, it's very hard to implement like deletion and like end of life data controls, because again, when they were collecting data, it was free for all. There was no requirement to enforce any sort of deletion. So these companies were built with the assumption that this data is going to be retained forever. And especially with these retention schedules, enforcement, you were required to keep the data. So the focus was on making sure we have data. And then with businesses evolving into like, how do we make more use of the data, using it for ML models and extracting more data, more value from this data, it became like a much more important resource and to keep hold of and keep secure. So they were never, all of the systems were never designed to delete data. And it became more complicated because most companies don't have a good data governance program in place. So you don't even know where you have data that has sprawled into all these places where it shouldn't have been in the first place. And now when companies are trying to put some controls 3 years or after 1 year, this data needs to be deleted, they're looking at a huge tech debt of like a decade long of free for all data. So it seems like a very big problem to solve, and so big that it's almost a problem that you don't want to start. It feels like there are other things that are better investments to make in privacy than solving this problem. I don't think that any company has completely like 100% got a handle on this problem yet. My advice to startups and newer companies is think about this ahead of time and make sure you do privacy by design instead of now following all other companies and trying to like retroactively think about how to fix these problems. There are tools out there. It takes a lot of investment to even like build tools in-house. And a lot of it is based on how much data you have and like scanning it and finding out. So these costs run up to the millions. So it is a very expensive project for most companies.
I agree, it's an expensive project for most companies, but then a lot of companies, like when they bring on new tools, they spend a lot of that money up front and a lot of that attention is up front. The problem with this end of life thing is that these probably aren't high profile projects. They probably aren't projects that people have budgeted for. So not a lot of glory in this end of life.
True. It's not cool. You could be doing like more more interesting projects. As a privacy person, Debbie, would you want to go delete data, or would you want to like do privacy by design on this new Gen AI?
Yeah, both of them are hard, but at least the Gen AI stuff is a little bit more interesting.
And we have very lean privacy teams in most organizations. So you're being asked to do more with less, and companies are prioritizing for maybe like whatever is achievable. And at least looks like there'll be some end to that project versus this perpetual process of finding data and deleting it.
That's so true. I agree. I agree. I want your thoughts on the Digital Personal Data Protection Act in India that just passed. So I've been watching this for a number of years. I had given up hope actually a couple of years ago because I was like, oh my goodness. I remember when India made privacy a fundamental human right. And I thought, oh, wow, since they did that, then they're going to pass this law like really soon. And it took a couple of years and a lot of things. And then when the previous bill didn't pass, I was very disappointed. But then this one just popped up, and one of my friends in India actually has sent me a message like a week before. He's like, "Hey, I think this is gonna pass this time." I was like, "Are you think so?" And I'm like, he said, "Yeah." I was like, "I don't know about that," but it did. So here we are. I saw a post that you made where you kind of explained it, and I feel like a lot of people don't really understand it. And before I have you go into it, I'll tell you why I think India is very important. First of all, India is the largest democracy in the world. So there are more people in India than are in the US and Europe combined. There is a lot of interest. There's a lot of investment in India, especially around digital transformation and more people getting cell phones and different things like that. So I think a lot of tech companies have looked very deeply and closely at India and have looked at this with a lot of interest. So I think what they're doing is going to be influential with their Privacy Act. They had a front row seat to see how things happen in Europe, though, and the US. So they were able to maybe pick some of the best stuff from all those regimes and make it their own. But tell me about this act and tell me why it's important and what's in it.
Exactly what you said. India is a big market. There is a lot. There are a lot of people who live in India. So by just virtue of the population that it impacts, this is huge. And this is the first nationwide bill that gives people privacy rights, which is incredible. I remember going to India, and I'm an Indian citizen, so I travel very frequently and have been waiting for something like this for a long time. Mostly because whenever I go to like make any purchase to like a store in India, they almost like always ask you for a phone number, and I don't have a local India phone number. So I hold up the line because I don't have a phone number to give. And that sort of like breaks the process, because the process is not built to have people decline anything, to the point that the store, like the assistant, like they will just put their phone number in to like get me through. So there has been no right to like deletion, access ever. And this act empowers the residents from India to be able to like get a better handle on what data corporations have collected about them and be able to request deletion. This is still a very high level framework. It doesn't have a lot of the details yet. So it's lacking very prescriptive guidance, but it does provide rights to data principals or data subjects. And those are very limited exceptions for private entities. So irrespective of size, you have to comply. They haven't really specified the timelines yet. There is recent news that big tech is probably going to get 6 months to comply, where other companies are expected to get more, the graded timeline to compliance. But it's all very high level at this point, and we still are waiting for the rules and more prescriptive guidance on what needs to be built.
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited about what they're doing. I'm excited to see what the details that they put in there. When I'm thinking about India, it makes me think about the US. So, why do you think we don't yet have federal privacy regulation? I'll give you my thoughts too, but I want your thoughts first.
I'm not a lawyer, so I'll say that first. And I think that the US, I think state laws have been entrenched for so long, then it's so difficult to align on one law, federal law, which covers all of the state laws and doesn't have preemption and makes everyone happy, especially like a breach notification stuff. There is no reason why we need to have 50 different breach notification laws. I think that's at least that's like an easy one to harmonize and fix. So if we haven't been able to do that for so long, I'm not sure when or how we are going to like come up with this GDPR-like bill that covers all privacy.
I agree. I agree.
Super pessimistic about this.
Right. I thought, and that was my thing. I'm like, data breach. We already have 50 states that agree that it's important to have a law there. Like, why don't we just take that and harmonize that on a federal level and then let that be like a stepping stone to other things that we want to harmonize at a federal level? And that still hasn't happened. So I agree. I don't know. I'm not holding my breath. I'm not making any bets on when this is going to happen. I'm hoping that it will happen. But, as you said, I think it is hard because everyone has their own vision and the states have taken so much of a lead now that it makes it even harder, I think, to do federal law.
Do you think it'll happen sometime soon? Like, there's been a lot of predictions.
Well, two things I want to tell you. So I'll tell you when I think it's going to happen. Well, first of all, before I get to that, I'll tell you another reason why I think it's hard to do federal legislation in the US. Because I've heard people say, why don't we just take the GDPR and just implement that? And it's like, our eyes start rolling. It's like, oh, you just don't understand. In the US, for whatever reason, a lot of our laws are very prescriptive. And I think prescriptive laws, even though corporations like that, when the CCPA came out, I heard a lot of people say, we're not going to implement anything until we get the regulation. It's like, well, but you read the laws, you don't really need the regulation. I mean, maybe it'll help you if you just don't know, you don't understand how to implement, that'll help you. But having those very prescriptive laws, I think those are harder to pass than the more general laws like you have in the EU. For example, in the EU, they say stuff like you get rid of data once the purpose of you having the data has expired. You need to get rid of it, right? Where in the US, we have a California law saying put a button on your website that says this. What do you think?
Yeah. And then the whole opt-in regime versus the opt-out regime. Like, yeah.
It's crazy. But yeah, back to your question. When do I think it will happen? I can tell you when it won't happen. I don't know when it will happen. So I don't think it will happen in 2024. Maybe the next window of opportunity, it'll be 2025, maybe. What I've noticed is over the years is that just a lot of nothing happens on privacy in election years. And so because 2025 is an election year, Congress will be trying to get re-elected. So they're going to put this on the back burner unless something just ridiculous happens where they're like, unfortunately, something bad has to happen sometimes for a legislator to focus their attention there. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of movement there. And then when the Congress comes in, the new people are elected, that changes priorities, right? So you don't know who's in, who's out, who thinks is a priority or not. So that's going to, depending on who wins the elections in 2024, I think that will set the stage for what is going to happen in 2025. But I think that's our next window of opportunity. That's my view. What do you think?
I'm actually like, I'm not even sure if it'll happen then, just because we were so close this year and there was like so much conversation about it that it was going to happen and it didn't. So I'm not sure. It will make everybody's life easy if it does.
I don't know. I think they seem very excited about doing something on AI. So maybe something in AI will come out first, and then maybe we can hitch our wagon on AI somehow. Like, hey, let's stuff some privacy stuff in there.
That's possible because like after like usually I feel like US like mimics EU. So
Yeah.
since they've got a start.
Yeah, I don't know. The legislators are very hot on AI. That's like the hot thing in the news. People are really talking about it. So maybe they'll do something on AI. I read an article in the news and they were like, one of the problems that the US may have with trying to regulate AI is that they haven't done anything on a federal level on privacy. So that's kind of a building block that is missing there. So we'll see. I think it just makes it more complicated. So we see where the EU is going, where they did GDPR first, then they did this AI bill or act. So that's kind of like something that sits on top, I feel, of privacy. So right now, we don't have that foundation right now. But who knows? Who knows? They're going to jump over privacy. Maybe we'll have AI agency or something like that.
That'll be cool. Yeah, we'll keep an eye out for that. Any developments on that?
Yeah, any help well, that we can get on that space, that would be totally great. When you are talking with people about privacy as a career, I think it's a great career. But what are some of the things that maybe people wouldn't expect about privacy that you learned? That maybe it's like, I have to think about that.
When people are contemplating like a pivot to privacy or growing into a privacy career, a lot of times they don't actually know what privacy engineers or like people in various non-legal roles do. So there's a lot of ambiguity. There has been attempts to try to, demystify what is a privacy engineer. I believe like IPP published a sort of an infographic that I worked on as part of the IPP Privacy Engineering Board to define that there are different types of people who could call themselves privacy engineers. They're software engineers who are building the tools for, let's say, DSARs or anonymization or PETs. And we have designers and UX experts who are building interfaces which respect privacy, are free of deceptive designs. And then you have architects who are building the infrastructure that supports privacy. So there's a lot of different ways you can be involved in a privacy career on which is not legal. There are program managers who are managing large, like enterprise-wide projects to either do some sort of data mapping or do like a GDPR readiness or like a country launch or compliance with like CPRA or some other new law. There is a lot of flexibility, and it depends on like what skill sets you have, what interests you have, that you might be able to find a role in privacy that aligns with what you have and what you want to do. So just like knowing the field better is a good idea, like talking to people who are in this space. I wish there was like some nice flow chart or diagram that shows that these are all the like 10 roles possible, and here are the skill sets needed for each one of them. The other complexity while like transitioning is companies have very lean privacy teams. So you have people who are doing everything. Sometimes the privacy team is a team of one. So you end up, and those are lawyers who end up doing the legal advisory work and also like implementation related, more hands on things with implementations. I think Debbie, you're more in that space where you're like leaning into everything. So there is opportunity to do a lot and sort of like grow into something where you have interests. It's just like a very welcoming field which values diversity, like diversity of thought and background as well.
That's a great way to put it. I love the way you put that. And I think it'll be very valuable for people because I've heard a lot of people say, how can I break into privacy? And I feel like anyone with an interest in data or has some type of background in the data field, they can enrich their knowledge by leaning into privacy, maybe adding it to their other thing, their other specialty is. I think that definitely helps. So if it were the world according to you, Nandita, and we did everything you said, what would be your wish for privacy anywhere in the world or in any way, whether that be human behavior, regulation, or technology?
I think just because closer to the India's Privacy Act, and I'm like working on a couple of side projects related to that. It's just top of mind for me. It's great that it's been passed and we have something. It's a good start, but there are several red flags for this act. And my wish would be that we have some way to harmonize. For example, this new India's Data Privacy Act with existing Right to Information Act, which geared towards transparency and government accountability, which allows citizens to obtain information about various projects and public funds are being spent to uncover corruption. And this act, there is speculation that it weakens the RTI Act. Some context here is a lot of corruption in India lately has been exposed by journalists and citizens using this RTI Act to get information on who are the beneficiaries of certain welfare schemes. Where is money being spent? Who are loan defaulters? Where has this infrastructure been built? So I remember reading a report where the government of India has a maternity benefit scheme where they give economically weaker sections certain amount of welfare funds for women who are pregnant or who've just had a baby to be able to better support nutritional needs for babies. And an RTI inquiry revealed that men were claiming these benefits. The same women were claiming these benefits for like 5 times a year, which is like, this would have never been made available if it wasn't for this RTI Act, which allows you to get this information. And with the new Privacy Act, there is a speculation that it weakens this ability to question the government, uncover corruption by claiming privacy as a reason that it's protected information and these people did not consent to having their information be released. So anybody who's doing corruption would not consent to their information being released. That will potentially help uncover the corruption. So I'm a little bit worried on how such a good intention act on privacy can now potentially be used to perpetuate corruption and negatively impact the country. And I wish there is some way to harmonize and balance both.
I do know that a lot of times these laws exempt the government in some way from certain things.
There are broad carve-outs, like the government is exempt from pretty much everything. And they also have some really odd provisions where the government can enable like takedown requests, which is very odd in a privacy bill.
Yeah. Who has takedown? China? China has takedown as well.
Yes.
And they're like pretty aggressive. I think they give you like 15 minutes for certain takedowns. So yeah, that's my friend from Nike told me. Oh my goodness. Well, I'm so happy that you're on the show. This is so much fun. I love to follow your work and the things that you say. I definitely did take a look at the things you were talking about the India bill. So I feel like a lot of people don't understand that and understand the implications, but I love that you're helping to educate all of us on that because we all need to know.
Because the details don't exist and the timelines may be aggressive, at least from a technical standpoint of the operational response is you need to like start doing the things that you should already been doing, which is like data mapping, data governance, building consent flows. So a lot of it is just table stakes and it's not some groundbreaking compliance requirements, but yes, companies haven't done that. So for them, it is something that they'll need to prepare for and work towards.
It's a great goal and a great reminder. So we're only going to have more privacy regulations, not less. So for companies who haven't got the memo yet, you need to really pay attention to this area. So, well, thank you so much, Nandita. Happy to have you on the show and happy to chat with you soon.
Yeah, hopefully I'll run into you in one of the events sometime. I don't get it. IPC last.
Absolutely. I will love that. Well, thank you so much and I'll talk to you soon.